But just today I was having a conversation with somebody in his 80s who wanted to have a conversation about what to do in case, God forbid, he were to die. And he said, we've thought about this many times, but we've never actually sat down to do the specific planning. Now, I should say this is somebody whose name everyone would recognize and who is an industry leader in Canada. And in no way, shape, or form would this individual allow any of the companies with which he is associated to operate without contingency plans. And yet, in his own life, he does. And I think that many of us operate in similar ways, and many more who are not here tonight operate that way as well. I want to tell you about two actual cases of a death. The first, an American girl killed in a terrorist attack in Israel. Her father, shocked, calls his Orthodox rabbi to say, what do I do? And what do I do about the organs? He flies to Israel to identify the remains and consents to organ donation in advance of that, long distance. 6 organs go to 6 recipients, 4 Jews and 2 Arabs. Case number 2. An Israeli girl is being rushed to the United States for transplantation. Unfortunately, she dies neurologically, what is called brain death, en route. The family is requested to provide organs, and the family talks to their rabbi and says no. Why did 2 sets of observant Jews, and I'm going to use Orthodox Jews in this context for a specific reason, why did 2 sets of Orthodox Jews respond differently? At heart, I want to suggest that there is an encounter between Judaism and modernity, an encounter that asks in some ways how Jewish law should respond to technological and medical change. And some people come out on one side, and some come out on another side. So we as Jews grapple with universal issues in ways that reflect our values, our laws, our traditions, and our stories. I want to go to some basic considerations. How much time do I have? Okay. The first is what I believe is a traditional idea that we are not autonomous beings. Notwithstanding much of the history of Western philosophical and legal thought, we are not autonomous beings according to Jewish tradition, but rather we belong to God. God is the creator and the giver of life, and we are the stewards of life. God can limit our use of bodies, and God can restrict how, for example, we should act in given situations. And so Jewish law, in many ways, has all kinds of definitions about what is proper behavior in relationship to our own bodies. Secondly, as part of that, we are commanded, there is a mitzvah to preserve our lives. The mitzvah is articulated in the Torah as v'chai bahem, that you should live by the commandments and not die by them. We are commanded in certain cases to violate Shabbat or Yom Kippur for the preservation of life. We are commanded as well to care for our bodies. The Torah tells us, v'nishmartem ma'od, you should be exceptionally careful about yourselves. And it is on that basis that many people say it's inappropriate, it's prohibited even, to smoke cigarettes because you're not caring properly for your body. One may not injure oneself or others. That is, wounding others is prohibited. Wounding ourselves, cutting ourselves, doing something that would be self-inflicting some sort of wound. And we are obligated to preserve and save the lives of others. We're taught, lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. You should not stand idly by the blood of your brother. I would say of your sister as well. What this means is that you, even though you're not allowed to wound somebody else, in order to save somebody's life, you might be allowed to injure that person. I want you to think of what surgery is. Surgery licenses a physician to wound somebody, sometimes to injure them, in order, hopefully, to save their life. And finally, when we're told to care for ourselves, to preserve ourselves in life, that self-endangerment is not required. That is, if I see somebody who is drowning, I may choose to help that person, but I am not obligated to endanger myself. There's a limit to what I have to do. With that as some background, let me turn specifically to the question of organ donation. When organ donation began, it began with eyes. The question was, may you endanger yourself in order to receive the organ? Now think for a moment, because we take organ donation in some ways for granted. But organ donation was dangerous, and it remains dangerous. It's dangerous in terms of surgery, and it's dangerous because afterwards there is the graft-host disease, where our bodies want to reject the organ that's been given. And so the initial response was no. You should not endanger yourself by receiving an organ. Not donate, receive an organ. Because the likelihood is that it will not succeed. And then, in 1972, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, a great Orthodox rabbi, said that if the odds are 50% or greater for success, then it is permissible. With the development of anti-rejection drugs, cyclosporin and others like it, it became possible to raise the percentage of successful organ donations. With the faster transportation of organs from one location to another, it became possible for someone in one location to provide an organ that was a healthy organ for someone in another place. With new preservation methods, organ donation became more and more possible. And with refinements in surgical techniques, gradually, rabbis began to say, yes, it is all right to receive. And so, the Orthodox woman flying from Israel to America to receive a donation was doing something that her family and her rabbi had said was permissible. And even if the rates were really high, even obligatory. Secondly, what about the donor? Well, there is an affirmative obligation to save life. As I said, lo ta'amod al dam reyecha. You shall not stand idly by. But you're not allowed to endanger yourself in order to help somebody else. Or I should say, you're not obligated to. Former Chief Rabbi of England, Rabbi Yakubovich, Emanuel Yakubovich, said, it is obligatory to disregard law that conflicts with the immediate claim of life. That is, he wrote that it is actually sinful to observe laws which are suspended because of a danger to life or health. I'm not allowed, according to Rabbi Yakubovich, to make myself so holy that I say, no, I won't eat on Yom Kippur, when all of the medical professionals say that I must, or else I'll go into a diabetic coma. He said, I'm not speaking about me personally. He said, not only is it permissible, but it's imperative to disregard halachot, Jewish laws, that may be in conflict with the preservation of life and health. So, that's true for relatively innocuous procedures. For some, the donation of blood. For others, bone marrow donation. Those do not create tremendous problems for the donors. But what about donating a kidney or a liver, an organ that involves surgery? It was the change of technology at the end of the 20th century that led rabbinic authorities to revise the way they understood the donation of organs. Earlier, they said, the loss of an organ, well, the person who would do that in Hebrew is called a chassid shoteh, a pious fool, because they're putting themselves at risk. But once it became clear that there is less risk, once it became clear that the body can function with one kidney, with a partial lobe of liver, then rabbinic authorities began to rethink this, saying, yes, it is permissible it could be all right to donate. Now, some of the questions relate to post-mortem donation. And here are some of the cautions. We have a tremendous regard for the integrity of the body. And so we want to preserve the integrity of the body. We want to prohibit benefiting from a cadaver. You're not allowed to benefit from the dead, because that deceased body shouldn't be desecrated and used in some way. We know in the ancient world, people would take things from dead bodies and use them for potions and other things. And our halakha prohibits benefiting in that way from a dead body. And we have a mitzvah to bury in a timely manner. The day of death, the day after the death, sometimes we'll delay, but the imperative is always to bury as quickly as possible. Well, if it takes a long time to get an organ out, then that too would militate against organ donation. And it certainly would militate against what's called harvesting organs. But all rabbinic authorities came to an agreement. Remarkably, I say, 2 Jews, 3 opinions and all of that. Remarkably, Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, New Age, Hasidish, all came to a relatively similar consensus. There are, of course, some minor differences, that the preservation of life supersedes all 3 of those prohibitions. Now, there are some restrictions to be kept in mind. Some life-threatening conditions, non-life-threatening conditions. Some people used to say, well, what about the transplantation of a cornea? Can you really donate that? After all, what if it won't be used right away? How do you know that it's going to be used? What if it's one eye and not both eyes? You can begin to see, if you're already familiar with the way rabbis think, these kinds of questions coming up. And then Rabbi Unterman wrote that the impairment of vision in one eye is enough to justify a donation. And that even though we say you have to be able to give so that Kohl lefanecha, the person who is ill, is immediately near you, rabbinic authorities began to say, with transportation ability, it's possible for me in Toronto to offer a cornea and for someone in Alaska to benefit from it. And so we began to say, yes, even organs that appear not to be essential for life turn out to be essential for the well-being of a life. And what about autopsies? Again, some restrictions. Unless we're told the dead person is right before you, we always defer and say no autopsies. How many of you are aware of that? We always argue against autopsies. Unless there's a specific illness that's going through the community and there's the possibility of immediate benefit. But now, because of transportation, we say we don't want autopsies, but under some circumstances, and we try to limit them, it may be permissible. I want to go back to the live donations for a minute. But before I do, I want to talk about the idea that within our tradition, the physical and the spiritual are linked together. Not only for baby boys of the age of 8 days, and not only in terms of Shabbat and enjoying good food and rest and sexual pleasure, but in many other ways. So, for example, a death in our congregation that occurred in South America, an autopsy was required. We worked with a Chabad rabbi and the Israeli embassy in that community to have the body brought back here as quickly as possible. The government there required an autopsy. We bring back the human liquid in order to be buried with the deceased. Many of you have seen clips of Zakah, the Israeli organization that goes out to clean up after there's been a bombing, a terrorist attack, something like that. And they're scraping off the pavement in order to get every piece of blood, if possible. Even if there is a legal autopsy, we require that all organs be buried. Perhaps this has to do with the theology of physical resurrection, but I want to just say that even there, with the idea of the physical and the spiritual, that we don't really know what is happening or might happen down the road in terms of the world to come. Just as it's a miracle to create, so post-mortem, tchiyat hametim, physical resurrection, may also be possible. And we're going to leave it for God to sort that out in terms of what happens if I have somebody else's organ in my body. What does that mean for them down the road? Or vice versa. The Committee on Jewish Law and Standards for the Rabbinical Assembly has said Jews are obligated to donate. There's a moral responsibility. Certainly for cadaver donations, but even for live donations. The Reform and the Reconstructionist movements affirm that significance as a moral obligation as well. I'd like to talk for a moment about the division within the Orthodox community regarding post-mortem donations, in particular because of the question of the definition of death. There's a conflict between two very great rabbis regarding neurological or brain death. And this is what led to the question about the Israeli woman on the plane coming to America. That Rabbi Moshe Tendler says, yes, my father-in-law, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, says that neurological, or what we call brain death, is indeed full death according to Jewish law. It is the equivalent of decapitation. Psik resha. If you cut off somebody's head, v'lo yamut, won't they die? On the other hand, Rabbi J. David Bleich, also of Yeshiva University, says no. If it's not anatomical decapitation, you can't apply that same rule. If the heart is still beating, even though it's beating mechanically, we don't consider there to be brain death unless the brain has completely liquefied. And because of that differentiation, the Orthodox Jewish community is sometimes divided. But there is an organization called HOD, H-O-D, which stands for Halachic Organ Donation. They have pictures of many, many rabbis on their website. And they affirm the halachic validity of organ donation. I'm not so sure whether you can make as an imperative that someone must, a living person, must donate an organ. You can certainly, in my opinion, say that it's a tremendous act of chesed, an act of loving kindness. You can certainly say that this is a real example of going as far as you can to protect another life. But there are rabbinic authorities who would say, yes, it is a halachic imperative. If you have a match and you have an organ and you will be able to continue to live without one kidney, then there is actually an obligation to donate. So, is it reshut? Is it permissible? Is it chiyuv? Mandatory? That you'll find some differentiation on. But everyone will agree that it's something we should consider. The facility of information, transportation, and treatment make this more and more possible. Not as a dishonor to the body, but as an act that can save life. We are coming momentarily to the holiday of Shavuot. And we have a wonderful statement in the book of Ruth. May Boaz be blessed, for he has not failed in his chesed to the living or to the dead. That an act of donation is a chesed shel emet, an act of great honor and of great fidelity to the deceased, just as it is a gift of life for the one who will continue to live. Thank you.